The phone buzzed against the marble countertop of the kitchen I had personally renovated 2 summers ago. I was elbow-deep in preparing dinner for Marcus's business associates. The same dinner party he'd canceled on me 3 times before, claiming work emergencies. The same dinner party where he'd promised to finally introduce me as his wife to his colleagues after 18 months of marriage. Buzz. I glanced at the screen while wiping flour from my hands. Marcus, finally calling to tell me he was on his way home from his business trip to Los Angeles. But it wasn't a call. It was a text. Married my assistant. You're a failure, by the way. I stared at the words until they blurred. Read them again. The letters rearranged themselves in my mind, but the meaning remained brutally clear. My hands, still dusty with flour, began to shake. The measuring cup slipped from my grip and shattered against the hardwood floor. The same hardwood I'd picked out, paid for, and supervised. The installation of, while Marcus was too busy with work to be involved in our home renovations. Our home, had it ever really been ours? I sank onto the kitchen stool, the one I'd bought to match the island I designed, and reread the message. 18 months of marriage. 3 years of dating before that. 21 years of my life invested in a man who had just discarded me via text message, like I was a subscription service he no longer needed. You're a failure, by the way. The casual cruelty of those 4 words hit harder than the infidelity. The by the way tacked on like an afterthought, as if my worth or lack thereof was so obvious it barely merited mentioning. My phone buzzed again. For a wild moment, I thought it might be Marcus calling to say it was all a mistake, a cruel joke, anything but the reality I was drowning in. Instead, it was my credit card company sending an alert. Large purchase detected on your American Express. $15,000 at Tiffany & Co., Beverly Hills. He'd bought his new wife jewelry with my credit card. The same card I'd added him to for emergencies when we first got married. Back when I still believed in us, in him, in the future we were supposed to build together. I called the credit card company with steady hands that surprised me. Hi, I need to report fraudulent activity and cancel an authorized user immediately. Of course, ma'am. Can I have your account number? As I rattled off the digits I'd memorized from years of handling our finances, I caught my reflection in the black screen of the oven. Amara, 42 years old, looking every one of those years for the first time. My grandmother's wedding ring on my finger, the one I'd worn in addition to the band Marcus had chosen. The ring that had survived the Great Depression, World War II, and 63 years of marriage between 2 people who actually loved each other. Ma'am, I'll need to verify some information with you. Of course. As I answered security questions, I moved through the house with new eyes. The custom built-ins I'd commissioned for Marcus's book collection, filled with business journals he never read. The home office I'd converted from what was supposed to be a nursery, complete with the standing desk and ergonomic chair I'd researched for weeks to help with his back problem. The master bedroom with the king-size bed I'd bought because he complained my queen was too small even though he was barely 5'8". Everything in this house told the story of a woman who had systematically erased herself to make room for a man who saw her as a failure. I'm also going to need to change the locks on our joint accounts, I told the representative. Actually, let me call you back. I have some more calls to make. I started with our joint checking account, then our savings. Then I called a locksmith. How soon can you be here? I asked. I can have someone there in 2 hours, ma'am. Is this an emergency? I looked around the house I'd poured 3 years of my life into, the home where I'd planned to raise the children Marcus kept saying we'd have someday, the space where I'd hosted his family holidays and work events and birthday parties while he complained that I never put enough effort into making him happy. Yes, I said. It's an emergency. By 9 p.m., Marcus Hendricks, soon to be my ex-husband, was locked out of every account, credit card, and property he'd accessed through our marriage. The locks were changed. His belongings were packed and sitting on the front porch under the motion sensor lights I'd installed last year for his safety. My phone had been buzzing incessantly for the past hour. I'd stopped looking at it after the 15th call, let him rage into the void. I had more important things to do. I opened a bottle of wine, the good Bordeaux I'd been saving for our second wedding anniversary, and sat in the living room I'd decorated in the chair I'd chosen, looking out the window at the garden I'd planted. For the first time in 21 years, the silence in my home belonged entirely to me. The gun appeared the next morning. I found it when I came downstairs for my coffee, lying on the marble countertop like a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't finished writing. .38 revolver, the kind my father had taught me to shoot when I was 16 and he was worried about me living alone in college. My first instinct wasn't fear, it was rage. He'd been in my house, somehow. Despite the changed locks, despite my careful precautions, Marcus had gotten inside and left me a message that needed no words. The gun wasn't loaded. I checked immediately, muscle memory from those long-ago lessons kicking in. But the threat was clear. I was supposed to understand that my small act of rebellion had consequences. I should have called the police immediately. Any reasonable person would have called the police. But I'd spent 21 years being reasonable, being accommodating, being the perfect partner who never made waves or caused problems. Instead, I called my sister. Kendra, it's Aria. I need you to come over, now. Girl, it's 6:30 in the morning, what's wrong? Marcus left a gun on my counter. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I'm on my way. Kendra arrived in 15 minutes. Still in her pajamas, under a hastily thrown-on coat, her natural hair wrapped in a silk scarf. She took one look at the gun, then at me, and immediately understood what I was only beginning to process. How long? She asked. How long what? How long has he been threatening you? I wanted to say never, that this was the first time that I was as shocked as anyone, but the words died in my throat because they weren't true. There had been other moments, other incidents I'd explained away or forgotten. The time he'd grabbed my wrist so hard it bruised when I questioned one of his business expenses. The way he'd systematically isolated me from friends who asked too many questions about our relationship. The subtle constant criticism that made me second-guess every decision, every opinion, every instinct. I don't know, I said finally. Maybe always. Kendra nodded like she'd been expecting this answer. We're calling the police and then we're calling a lawyer. But first, we're getting you out of this house. I'm not leaving. This is my house. Aria. No. The word came out harder than I'd intended. I said I'm not leaving. I've spent 21 years shrinking myself to fit into Marcus's life. I've moved, compromised, sacrificed, and adapted until I don't even recognize myself anymore. I'm not running away from the one thing that's actually mine. Kendra studied my face, and I saw the moment she recognized something different in me. The same thing I'd seen in the oven's reflection the night before. Okay, she said. Then we call the police and the lawyer from here. But we're also calling Uncle Jerome. Uncle Jerome wasn't actually our uncle. He was our father's best friend from the army. A man who'd spent 30 years as a police detective in Detroit before retiring to a small town outside Atlanta. More importantly, he was the person who'd taught both Kendra and me that sometimes the system works, and sometimes you have to make it work. Jerome Washington, his voice rumbled through the phone 20 minutes later. Kendra had put him on speaker while we waited for the police to arrive. Uncle Jerome, it's Aria. I need advice. I told him everything, starting with the text message and ending with the gun. He listened without interrupting, asking only a few clarifying questions about the timeline and whether I had any evidence of Marcus's access to the house. Here's what's going to happen, he said when I finished. The responding officers are going to take your statement and file a report, but unless you have proof Marcus left that gun, they're not going to arrest anybody. You said the gun isn't registered to him? I ran the serial number. It's not registered to anyone. Smart girl. So they'll take the weapon, file a report, and Marcus will deny everything. You need to document everything from here on out. Every phone call, every text, every time he shows up at your workplace or your house. You need a paper trial, because this isn't over. What do you mean, baby girl? Men like Marcus don't just walk away quietly when someone cuts off their access to resources, especially when that someone is a black woman. They think they can intimidate. He's going to escalate before he gives up. The police arrived as Uncle Jerome predicted. 2 officers, 1 older white man, who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, and 1 younger black woman, who took careful notes and asked good questions. They photographed the gun, took my statement, and gave me a case number. Has your husband made any direct threats against you? Officer Williams, the younger officer, asked. Not in words. Ma'am, I understand this is frightening, but without direct threats or evidence that he placed the weapon there, our hands are tied. Have you considered filing for a restraining order? I had not considered it. The word restraining order belonged to other people's lives, messier lives than the one I'd carefully constructed. But as Officer Williams explained the process, I realized that my careful construction had been an illusion. I'd been living in someone else's life all along. After the police left, Kendra made coffee and we sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd received the text that started this 24 hours ago, planning what came next. You need a lawyer, she said. Not just any lawyer. You need someone who specializes in complex divorces with financial complications. It doesn't have to be complicated, I just want out. Kendra looked at me like I'd suggested we solve world hunger with positive thinking. Arya, you've been married for 18 months to a man who just spent $15,000 of your money on jewelry for another woman. A man who somehow got into your house after you changed the locks to leave a gun on your counter. This is complicated whether you want it to be or not. She was right, of course. Kendra was a financial planner, had been for 15 years, and she'd spent our entire adult lives watching me make decisions with my heart instead of my head, watching me ignore red flags and rationalize problems and prioritize everyone else's comfort over my own security. I have money, I said. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, though I'd been thinking it since the moment I'd started canceling credit cards. I have a lot of money. Kendra raised an eyebrow. How much money? Enough that I don't need to depend on anyone for anything ever again. This was the truth I'd been hiding from myself for 21 years. I'd always made more money than Marcus, but I'd spent 2 decades pretending otherwise to protect his ego. I downplayed promotions, bonuses, investments that had paid off better than I'd expected. I'd let him believe he was the primary breadwinner while I quietly accumulated wealth he knew nothing about. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd called me a failure had been living off my success for years without even knowing it. Show me, Kendra said. I pulled up my banking app, the accounts Marcus had never had access to, the emergency fund I'd been building since I was 20, the investment portfolio I'd started with money from my grandmother's estate, the retirement accounts I'd maxed out every year while Marcus complained about his student loan payments. Kendra's eyes widened. Jesus, Arya, you've got enough here to buy a house in cash. I already own a house, you know what I mean. I did know what she meant. I had fuck you money, as my father used to call it. Enough money to walk away from any situation, any person, any life that didn't serve me. I just never had the courage to use it. Until now. I want to hire the best divorce attorney in the state, I said. I want to make sure Marcus gets exactly what he's entitled to, which is nothing. And I want to know how he got into my house. Kendra smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Now you're talking sense. Sarah Chen, Esquire, had the kind of office that communicated competence before she spoke a word. Floor-to-ceiling law books, a mahogany desk that could have doubled as a small aircraft carrier, and diplomas from Harvard Law School and Georgetown arranged with mathematical precision on walls painted in a shade of gray that probably had a name like litigation steel or victory charcoal. She was smaller than I'd expected from her phone voice, barely 5'2" in heels that added at least 3 inches, but she carried herself like someone who'd never lost an argument in her life. Her handshake was firm, her smile was brief, and her first question cut straight to the heart of the matter. How much money are we protecting? I'd spent 3 days researching divorce attorneys before settling on Sarah. She specialized in high-asset divorces, had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless, and according to her website had never lost a case involving financial fraud. Her retainer was $15,000, exactly what Marcus had spent on jewelry for his assistant, which felt like the universe providing its own twisted sense of justice. Approximately $2.7 million in liquid assets, I said. Another $800,000 in retirement accounts. The house is worth about $550, and I own it outright. Sarah's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight widening of her eyes. And your husband has access to how much of this? The joint checking account has about $12,000 in it. Joint savings has $50,000. Those are the only accounts with his name on them. What about the house? Deed is in my name only. I bought it 2 years before we got married. Vehicles? Both titled to me. Sarah set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did your husband know about your assets? I thought about all the conversations we'd never had, all the financial discussions I'd avoided, all the times I'd paid for things and let him assume the money came from somewhere else. No, I don't think he had any idea. You don't think, or you're certain. And I'm certain Marcus isn't. He's not detail-oriented about money. He knew I worked, knew I made decent money, but he never asked about specifics. What do you do for work? I'm a software engineer. I specialize in cybersecurity architecture for healthcare systems. I paused. I also do consulting work, and I have some rental properties. Sarah made a note. Consulting income over the past 2 years? About $300,000 annually. Rental income, $48,000 annually. Your base salary, $160,000. Sarah did some quick math in her head. I watched her expression change as she realized what I was telling her. Marcus had married a woman he thought made $60,000 or $70,000 a year. He'd actually married a woman who made over $500,000 annually and was worth more than most people would see in their lifetimes. Miss Thompson, she said carefully, I need you to understand something. When your husband finds out about your assets, and he will find out, this is going to get very ugly very quickly. How ugly? The kind of ugly that makes people do desperate things. You said he left a gun on your counter. I nodded. That was just the beginning. Men who feel entitled to women's resources don't typically accept being cut off gracefully, especially when they discover those resources are significantly larger than they imagined. Sarah opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. I've prepared a preliminary asset protection strategy, but we need to move fast. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, which means marital assets are divided fairly, but not necessarily equally. The good news is that everything you earned or owned before marriage remains separate property. The bad news is that anything acquired or commingled during the marriage becomes marital property. What does that mean for me? It means we need to prove that your assets remained separate throughout the marriage. No commingling, no joint investments, no using marital funds to improve separate property. I thought about the house renovations, the new appliances, the landscaping, all paid for with my separate accounts, but would that be enough? I have receipts for everything, I said. Bank records, investment statements, property records. I'm very organized. Sarah smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. That's going to save us a lot of time and money. Now, let's talk about the gun incident. Have there been any other threats or concerning behaviors? I told her about the $15,000 jewelry purchase, about Marcus's history of controlling behavior, about the subtle financial manipulation I was only now beginning to recognize, how he'd always insisted I pay for groceries, utilities, and household expenses while he handled the big bills like his car payment and student loans, how he'd never contributed to house maintenance or improvements but had strong opinions about both, how he'd somehow convinced me that supporting his lifestyle was a natural extension of loving him. Classic financial abuse, Sarah said, making notes. He was essentially using you as a personal bank while contributing as little as possible to the household. The question is whether he was doing it consciously or whether he'd just stumbled into a good situation. Does it matter? For the divorce, not really. For your safety, absolutely. Conscious predators are more dangerous when cornered. Sarah pulled out another document. I want you to consider filing for a temporary restraining order. The gun incident gives us grounds, and it would prevent him from contacting you directly during the proceedings. What if it makes him angrier? Mrs. Thompson, respectfully, he's already angry. He's angry enough to commit credit card fraud and break into your house. A restraining order won't make him angrier, but it will make his anger a legal problem instead of just your problem. I signed the paperwork for the restraining order along with a retainer agreement and financial disclosures that would have bought a nice car. As I wrote the check, I realized I was paying more for legal protection than Marcus made in 6 months at his sales job. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. What happens now? I asked. Now we file for divorce and the restraining order simultaneously. Georgia has a 60-day waiting period for divorce, but we can get a temporary hearing within 2 weeks to establish custody of assets and enforce the restraining order. I'll also have my investigator look into how your husband gained access to your house. You have an investigator, Mrs. Thompson. Your husband is married to 2 women simultaneously. That's bigamy, which is a felony. He's committed credit card fraud, which is another felony. He's stalking and intimidating you, which are misdemeanors that can become felonies with the right evidence. We're not just getting you divorced. We're building a case that will ensure he can't hurt you or anyone else. I left Sarah's office with a folder full of documents and instructions, a court date in 2 weeks, and something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the desperate hope I'd carried through 21 years of relationship problems, but real hope based on concrete action and legal protections. The drive home took me through downtown Atlanta, past the building where I'd worked for the past 8 years, past the coffee shop where Marcus and I had had our first date, past all the landmarks of the life I'd been living before yesterday. Everything looked the same, but I felt like I was seeing it all for the first time. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Unknown number. Amara. Speaking. This is Detective Martinez with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. I'm calling about the breaking and entering report you filed yesterday. My heart rate spiked. Did you find something? We'd like you to come in and look at some video footage. Are you available this afternoon? Video footage? Your neighbor across the street has a security camera system. It captured someone entering your property Monday night. I gripped the phone tighter. Was it my husband? That's what we'd like you to help us determine. The sheriff's office was a study in institutional beige and fluorescent lighting, the kind of place that made everyone look either guilty or exhausted regardless of why they were there. Detective Martinez was a compact man with graying temples and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent years listening to people's worst days. We pulled footage from 3 different cameras, he explained, leading me to a small room with a computer monitor. Your neighbor, Miss Patterson, has quite an extensive security system. I made a mental note to thank Mrs. Patterson, my 70-something neighbor who I'd always thought was a bit paranoid with her multiple doorbell cameras and motion sensor lights. Here's the relevant footage, Detective Martinez said, clicking play on a video file. The timestamp showed Monday night, 11:47 p.m. The footage was black and white but surprisingly clear, showing my front yard and driveway. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a figure appeared at the edge of the frame, moving carefully along the side of my house. Even in grainy security footage, even trying to move stealthily, Marcus was unmistakable. His height, his build, the way he carried his left shoulder slightly higher than his right from an old baseball injury. It was definitely him.
That's my husband,
I said. The detective made a note. Keep watching. On screen, Marcus approached my front door and knelt down. He appeared to be doing something with the lock, though the camera angle made it impossible to see exactly what. How long does this go on? About 12 minutes. He's clearly struggling with whatever method he's using to gain entry. I watched my husband's soon-to-be ex-husband systematically break into my home. The casual violation of it was almost worse than the gun itself. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was premeditated, methodical, patient. There's more, Detective Martinez said. The timestamp jumped to 12:23 a.m. Now the footage showed Marcus exiting my house. Carrying what looked like a small bag, he moved quickly across the yard and disappeared off camera. The entry took 12 minutes. He was inside for about 34 minutes. 34 minutes. I tried to imagine what he'd done in my house for over half an hour. Had he gone through my belongings? My computer? My financial records? Miss Thompson, we have enough here for breaking and entering charges. Given that you're married, we can't charge him with burglary unless we can prove intent to commit theft or another felony, but the gun changes things. How? Intimidation of a witness is a felony. If we can prove he left that gun as a threat related to your divorce proceedings, we can charge him with witness intimidation in addition to breaking and entering. I thought about Sarah Chen's words. We're not just getting you divorced, we're building a case that will ensure he can't hurt you or anyone else. What do you need from me? We need you to stay safe while we build the case. Do you have somewhere you can stay while we serve the warrant? The question caught me off guard. You're arresting him. We're going to try. The breaking and entering charge is solid. We have clear video evidence. The intimidation charge depends on proving intent, which is harder. But yes, we're issuing a warrant. I should have felt satisfaction or relief or vindication. Instead, I felt a strange sort of sadness, not for Marcus, but for the version of myself who'd spent 21 years believing that love meant accepting unacceptable behavior. I'll stay with my sister, I said. But even as I made the promise, I knew I wouldn't keep it. I'd spent too many years running away from problems, avoiding confrontation, making myself smaller to accommodate other people's dysfunction. This time, I was staying put. The warrant was served at Marcus's hotel room the following morning. By noon, he was in custody on charges of breaking and entering and intimidation of a witness. By 3 p.m., local news stations were running a story about a love triangle turned criminal that made my life sound like a Lifetime movie. By 6 p.m., my phone was ringing non-stop with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I'd underestimated how quickly word would spread. Marcus worked in sales for a mid-sized company that did business all over Atlanta. His assistant-turned-wife worked for the same company. Their impromptu wedding in Las Vegas, followed immediately by his arrest for breaking into his first wife's house, was apparently the kind of gossip that spread through professional networks like wildfire. Kendra came over with Thai food and wine, ostensibly to celebrate but really to make sure I was okay. "This is insane," she said, scrolling through Facebook on her phone. "Half my timeline is people sharing the news story about you. What are they saying? Mostly supportive stuff. A lot of I always thought something was off about that man, and she's better off without him. But there are some," she trailed off. "Some what?" "Some people saying you're being vindictive, that you should have just gotten a quiet divorce instead of pressing criminal charges." I felt the familiar stab of guilt, the old instinct to worry about what other people thought, to wonder if I was being too harsh or too demanding or too much. Then I remembered Marcus's hands on the lock of my front door at midnight. I remembered the gun on my kitchen counter. I remembered 21 years of making myself smaller. "Let them talk," I said. "I'm done living my life for other people's comfort." Kendra looked up from her phone. "Who are you and what have you done with my sister?" "I'm the woman I should have been all along." That night, alone in my house for the first time since Monday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I walked through each room and asked myself what I actually liked about it. Not what Marcus liked, not what looked impressive to guests, not what I thought a proper home should look like, what I actually enjoyed. The answer was surprising. I liked almost none of it. The living room was decorated in neutrals that Marcus had said were sophisticated, but that made me feel like I was living in a hotel lobby. The bedroom was painted in a gray that he'd chosen because it was calming, but that reminded me of rainy days and depression. Even the kitchen, which I'd convinced myself I loved, was designed around entertaining people I didn't particularly like. I'd spent 3 years and probably $50,000 turning my house into a showcase for a life I didn't want to live. But it was my house, my money, my life, and for the first time in 21 years, my choices. I opened a bottle of wine, not the expensive Bordeaux I saved for special occasions, but a cheap Moscato I actually enjoyed, and started making a list. Not a to-do list or a responsible adult list, but a list of things I wanted, things I'd forgotten I could want. The list started small: paint the bedroom yellow, buy flowers for no reason, eat ice cream for breakfast. But as the wine worked its magic and the silence in my house settled around me like a comfortable blanket, the list grew bolder: travel to Italy, learn to play piano again, write the novel I'd been thinking about for 10 years, buy art I actually liked instead of art that matched the furniture, date someone who made me laugh more than they made me worry. By the time I went to bed, the list was 3 pages long, and I was crying, not from sadness but from relief. Relief at remembering that I was a person with preferences and dreams and desires beyond making other people happy. I fell asleep in the middle of my king-size bed, the bed I'd bought for Marcus's comfort, and woke up the next morning with a plan. The temporary restraining order hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Thursday in a courtroom that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and disappointment. Sarah had warned me that Marcus would be there with his own attorney, that I should expect him to look different, cleaned up, contrite, playing the role of wronged husband rather than criminal defendant. She was right about the cleaned up part. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in a navy suit I'd never seen before, his hair freshly cut, his posture radiating injured dignity. Next to him sat an attorney who looked like he charged by the syllable and believed his client's version of events complete. What Sarah hadn't prepared me for was seeing Marcus and immediately feeling nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not even satisfaction at his obvious discomfort, just a sort of detached curiosity, like observing a stranger's bad behavior on public transportation. This man had dominated my thoughts and decisions for 21 years, and now he felt irrelevant to my life. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Reeves. Judge Reeves was a black woman in her 50s with silver hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades watching people lie to her face. She reviewed our case file while we waited in silence, occasionally making notes or raising an eyebrow at something she read. "This is a petition for a temporary restraining order," she said finally. "Mrs. Thompson, you're alleging that your husband, Mr. Hendricks, broke into your home and left a weapon there in an attempt to intimidate you during divorce proceedings." "Yes, Your Honor." "Hendricks, how do you respond to these allegations?" Marcus's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client denies these allegations completely. Mr. Hendricks has been staying at a hotel since the marital separation began, and he has no reason to threaten or intimidate Mrs. Thompson. This appears to be a vindictive attempt to gain advantage in divorce proceedings." Sarah stood to respond. "Your Honor, we have video evidence of Mr. Hendricks breaking into Mrs. Thompson's home, as well as evidence that he committed credit card fraud prior to the breaking and entering. He has already been charged criminally for these actions." Judge Reeves looked at Marcus. "Is it true that you've been arrested on charges related to this matter?" "Yes, ma'am, but yes or no will suffice." She turned back to Sarah. "What video evidence are you referring to?" Sarah produced a laptop and a thumb drive. "Security footage from a neighbor's camera system clearly shows Mr. Hendricks entering and exiting Mrs. Thompson's home on the night in question." Judge Reeves watched the footage twice, her expression growing more stern with each viewing. When she finished, she looked at Marcus's attorney. "Does your client have an explanation for why he was on this property at midnight, or how he gained entry to a house where he doesn't live?" Marcus's attorney whispered something to Marcus, who shook his head vigorously. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence and requests that the court not make any determinations based on criminal allegations that haven't been proven." Judge Reeves set down her glasses and fixed Marcus with a look that could have melted steel. "Miss Hendricks, I'm looking at clear video evidence of you breaking into your wife's home. Are you claiming this isn't you in the footage? For the first time, Marcus spoke for himself. Your Honor, I just wanted to get some of my belongings. I didn't think she would mind. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. I watched Marcus realize what he'd just admitted, watched his attorney close his eyes in defeat, watched Judge Reeves write something on her notepad that probably didn't bode well for Marcus's future. So you admit you entered the property illegally, Judge Reeves said. It's complicated. Your Honor, it's really not. Judge Reeves looked at her notes again. Mrs. Thompson, the court is granting your request for a temporary restraining order. Ms. Hendricks is ordered to have no contact with you directly or indirectly. He may not come within 500 feet of your home or workplace, and he may not possess any firearms during the pendency of these proceedings. She turned to Marcus. Mr. Hendricks, do you understand these conditions? Yes, ma'am. Violation of this order is contempt of court and will result in immediate arrest. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. The court will also order that any personal belongings you need from the marital home be retrieved in the presence of a sheriff's deputy. You do not get to decide unilaterally what constitutes your belongings or when to retrieve them. Judge Reeves gathered her papers. This court is adjourned. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I was floating. Sarah was practically vibrating with satisfaction beside me. That went better than I expected, she said. His attorney clearly didn't prepare him for cross-examination. Admitting to illegal entry in open court is going to make the divorce proceedings much simpler. What happens next? We file the formal divorce petition and financial disclosure. Given his admission today, I doubt his attorney will want to drag this out. Most judges don't look favorably on husbands who break into their wives' homes during marital disputes. As we reached our cars, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You've ruined my life and I won't forget it. I showed the message to Sarah, who immediately called courthouse security. Within 20 minutes, Marcus was back in custody for violating the restraining order. His bond was revoked, and he would remain in jail until his criminal trial. While Sarah said as we watched him being led away in handcuffs, that saves us the trouble of worrying about further intimidation. But Marcus's arrest was just the beginning of my real problem. The next morning I woke up to 17 missed calls from my mother and a voicemail that made my stomach drop. Aria, honey, I need you to call me immediately. Marcus's family is saying terrible things about you on social media, and now the whole church is talking about it. People are asking me what's wrong with you, why you're trying to destroy a good man. Call me. I'd forgotten about Marcus's family. His mother, Patricia, who'd never liked me but tolerated me because I was stable. His sister, Nicole, who'd always resented that Marcus had married someone more successful than her husband. His father, Robert, who'd spent every family gathering explaining why successful black women were destroying the black family by emasculating black men. They'd apparently decided that I was the villain in this story. I called my mother back while making coffee in my peaceful kitchen. Mom, what exactly are they saying? They're saying you had Marcus arrested out of spite, that you're lying about him threatening you to get more money in the divorce. Patricia is telling everyone that you never loved Marcus, that you just wanted to control him financially. The irony was stunning. I'd spent 21 years hiding my financial success to protect Marcus's ego, and now his family was claiming I'd used money to control him. Mom, he broke into my house and left a gun on my counter. There's video evidence. I know, baby, but they're making it sound like you seduced him into marriage just to take advantage of him financially. Like you planned this whole thing. I sat down hard on my kitchen stool. Marcus's family was crafting a narrative where I was the predator and he was the victim. Where a black woman with money was inherently suspicious, inherently manipulative, inherently dangerous to the men around her. It was a narrative that would resonate with a lot of people. Mom, you know that's not true. Of course I know that. But other people don't. And Patricia has a big mouth and a lot of friends. Over the next week, I watched my reputation get systematically destroyed on social media. Someone had leaked details from the divorce filing, including my asset disclosure. Suddenly, everyone knew exactly how much money I had, and they had opinions about what that meant. Some people were supportive, my colleagues from work, my neighbors, most of my college friends. They saw the situation clearly and offered their encouragement. But others, particularly people from Marcus's circle and some members of our church, had decided that my money made me the real villain. The comments on news articles about the case were particularly brutal. She trapped him with money and now she's trying to destroy him for leaving her. Successful women like this are why good black men date white women. She probably planted that gun herself for attention. This is what happens when women make more money than their husbands. They think they can control everything. The worst part was recognizing some of the names commenting people I'd served on church committees with, neighbors I'd helped during emergencies, acquaintances who'd smiled to my face while apparently harboring deep resentment about my success. I was getting a crash course in how quickly public opinion could turn, especially when the public was uncomfortable with successful black women in the first place. My work suffered. Not officially, my boss and HR department were completely supportive, but I could feel the whispers, the sideways glances, the way conversations stopped when I entered a room. Some of my consulting clients began asking awkward questions about my situation and whether it would affect my ability to focus on their projects. For the first time since this ordeal began, I considered giving up. Maybe Marcus's family was right. Maybe I should have just quietly divorced him and moved on with my life. Maybe pressing criminal charges had been vindictive. Maybe I was the problem. Then I remembered the gun on my counter. I remembered 21 years of Marcus taking credit for my contributions while dismissing my achievements. I remembered him spending my money on jewelry for another woman. I remembered him breaking into my house like a common criminal, and I remembered that the people criticizing me had never asked what I'd endured or why I'd finally decided to protect myself. I called Sarah. "They're trying to destroy my reputation," I said. "I know. I've seen some of the social media posts. How are you holding up?" "I'm angry." "Good. Anger is useful. What do you want to do about it?" "I want to fight back. Not just against Marcus, but against all of it. I want people to know the truth." "What truth specifically?" I'd been thinking about this question for days. What was the truth? That I'd been financially supporting a man who'd taken credit for my success? That I'd spent 2 decades making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's insecurities? That the same people calling me vindictive had never criticized Marcus for his behavior? The truth is that I'm not the first woman this has happened to, and I won't be the last. The truth is that women are expected to accept unacceptable behavior in the name of keeping the peace. The truth is that when women finally protect themselves, they get blamed for the mess men created. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "That's a powerful truth. How do you want to tell it?" "I want to write about it. Not just my story, but the bigger story. I want other women to know they're not alone." "Are you prepared for the backlash that will come with going public?" I thought about Patricia Hendricks telling the church congregation that I was a gold-digging manipulator. I thought about the comments calling me a bitter woman who destroyed a good man. I thought about a lifetime of being told that successful women were threats to be contained rather than people to be celebrated. "Let them come," I said. "I'm done hiding." That weekend I sat down at my computer, the same computer Marcus had probably searched through during his 34-minute violation of my home, and started writing. I wrote about growing up, believing that love meant sacrifice, and how that belief had nearly cost me everything. I wrote about the subtle ways financial abuse manifests in relationships, how it's disguised as partnership and normalized as feminine duty. I wrote about the double bind facing successful black women, criticized for achieving too much and blamed for accepting too little. I wrote about the gun on my counter and what it represented, the moment when accommodating someone else's dysfunction nearly cost me my safety. Most importantly, I wrote about the moment I'd chosen to save myself. The piece was 3,000 words long, and more honest than anything I'd ever written. I sent it to Sarah first, then to Kendra, then to my mother. All three told me it was powerful and necessary, and terrifying. "You sure you want to do this?" Kendra asked. "Once you publish this, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure." I submitted the piece to a major online publication that specialized in women's stories. They accepted it within 24 hours and scheduled it to run the following week. The night before publication, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the ways this could backfire, all the people who would be angry, all the bridges I might be burning. I kept wondering if I was making a mistake, if I should pull the piece and handle my divorce quietly, like a respectable woman. Then I got up and reread what I'd written. It was good. More than good. It was true. And truth had power, even when it was uncomfortable. Especially when it was uncomfortable. The piece went live at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday with the headline, "The Gun on My Counter: How Financial Abuse Nearly Killed Me." By noon, it had been shared 50,000 times. By evening, I had interview requests from 3 major news networks and 200 messages from women telling me their own stories of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. I also had death threats, accusations of lying, and several voicemails from people calling me everything from a man-hater to a race traitor. But for every hateful message, there were 10 supportive ones. Women thanking me for speaking out. Men acknowledging their own behavior, therapists and lawyers sharing resources for people in similar situations. The piece had touched a nerve, but it was a nerve that needed touching. A week later, I was invited to speak at a conference about financial literacy for women. Then another about domestic violence prevention, then a podcast about Black women's experiences with financial abuse. Each speaking engagement led to more opportunities, more connections, more women reaching out to share their stories. What had started as my personal revenge against Marcus had become something much bigger, a platform for addressing issues that affected millions of women. Marcus, meanwhile, was still in jail awaiting trial. His attorney had tried to get him released on bond twice, but Judge Reeves wasn't interested in giving him another chance to violate court orders. His criminal trial was scheduled for the following month. The divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly. With Marcus in custody and clear evidence of his fraudulent behavior, his attorney was focused on damage control rather than fighting for assets. They'd already agreed that I would keep everything that was mine before the marriage, plus the house and its contents. Marcus would get his personal belongings, his car, and his debts. It was exactly what I'd wanted 6 months ago, but now it felt like a footnote to a much larger story. 2 weeks after my article was published, I got an unexpected call. "Miss Thompson, this is Janet Morrison from Morrison & Associates. We're a literary agency in New York." "Okay, I read your piece about financial abuse and I think you should write a book. Have you considered it?" I had not considered it. I'd been too busy speaking at conferences and managing my consulting work and dealing with the aftermath of my very public divorce. But as soon as she said it, I knew she was right. "What kind of book?" "Part memoir, part guide for women in similar situations. Your story combined with practical advice about protecting assets, recognizing financial abuse, building independence. There's a huge market for this kind of content. I've never written a book, but you can write." That piece was beautifully crafted and incredibly compelling. I think you could help a lot of women. That night, I made another list. Not a list of things I wanted, but a list of things I knew about surviving financial abuse and rebuilding after betrayal. The list was longer than I'd expected. I knew about hiding assets to protect yourself. I knew about recognizing manipulation tactics. I knew about the emotional labor of managing someone else's financial irresponsibility. I knew about the guilt and self-doubt that came with putting yourself first for the first time in decades. I also knew about the strength that comes from choosing yourself, the relief of living honestly, the joy of making decisions based on your own values rather than someone else's expectations. Most importantly, I knew that none of this was really about market. It was about a system that taught women to accommodate, sacrifice, and endure, while teaching men to expect, demand, and take. Marcus had been a symptom. The disease was much bigger. I called Janet Morrison back the next morning. "I want to write the book," I said. "Excellent. I have some publishers in mind already. Can you put together a proposal? How soon do you need it? How soon can you have it?" I looked around my kitchen, my peaceful, gun-free, Marcus-free kitchen, and smiled. "Give me 2 weeks." The book proposal was finished in 10 days, not 2 weeks. Once I started writing, I couldn't stop. Years of suppressed thoughts, observations, and insights poured onto the page like water through a broken dam. The proposal included a detailed outline, 3 sample chapters, and a marketing plan that leveraged my growing platform as a speaker and advocate. Janet Morrison loved it. More importantly, publishers loved it. We had 3 offers within a month, including one from a major publishing house that came with a 6-figure advance and a commitment to extensive marketing support. I signed the contract on the same day. Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in prison for breaking and entering, intimidation of a witness, and credit card fraud. The timing felt cosmically appropriate. His sentencing hearing was the last time I saw him in person. He'd lost weight in jail, and the expensive suit had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller somehow. When Judge Reeves asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he stood up and looked directly at me. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "I made mistakes, but I never meant for things to go this far." I felt nothing. Not forgiveness, not anger, not even pity, just a vague curiosity about how someone could break into their wife's house, leave a weapon on her counter, and still believe they were the victim in the situation. Judge Reeves was less generous.
"Mr. Hendricks, you've had multiple opportunities to take responsibility for your actions, and you've chosen instead to minimize, deflect, and blame others. The court finds that you pose a continued threat to your estranged wife and to the community. 18 months in state prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation." The gavel came down with a sound like finality. Marcus's new wife, I'd never learned her name and decided I didn't need to, was in the gallery crying. His mother shot me a look of pure hatred as the bailiff led him away. His father muttered something under his breath that I'm sure wasn't complimentary. I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I was shedding skin, leaving behind not just Marcus but the version of myself that had tolerated his behavior for 21 years. The divorce was finalized 2 months later in a brief proceeding that felt anticlimactic after everything that had led up to it. I kept the house, my assets, and my name. Marcus got his freedom in 18 months and a criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life. But the real victory wasn't legal, it was personal. 6 months after the divorce was final, I was sitting in my newly redecorated bedroom, painted yellow like sunshine, furnished with pieces I'd chosen because they made me happy, working on my book when Kendra called. "Turn on Channel 5, she said. "Why?" "Just do it." The news was running a follow-up story about my case, prompted by Marcus's upcoming release from prison, but instead of focusing on the criminal aspects, the story was about the women who'd come forward after reading my article. Women who'd recognized their own situations in my story and found the courage to leave abusive relationships. The reporter interviewed Sarah Chen, who talked about seeing an increase in clients seeking help with financial abuse cases. They interviewed a domestic violence counselor who said my article had become required reading in her program. They even interviewed 2 women who credited my story with helping them recognize and escape their own financial abuse situation. Local woman Amara may have started by protecting herself, the reporter concluded, but her courage to speak publicly about financial abuse has created a ripple effect that's helping women across the country recognize and escape similar situations. I turned off the TV and sat in the silence of my peaceful home. Outside my window, the garden I'd planted was in full bloom. Flowers I'd chosen, arranged the way I wanted them, tended according to my own schedule and preferences. The book was nearly finished. The speaking engagements were booked solid for the next 6 months. My consulting business was thriving, boosted partly by publicity, but mostly by the confidence that came from living authentically. But the real measure of my success wasn't professional or financial. It was the simple fact that every decision I made was mine. Every dollar I spent was allocated according to my priorities. Every relationship in my life was based on mutual respect, rather than accommodation and manipulation. I'd spent 42 years learning how to sacrifice for others. It had taken me less than a year to learn how to choose myself. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Miss Thompson, I read your article and I think my husband is doing the same things to me. Can you help me figure out what to do?" I'd been getting messages like this for months. Each one broke my heart and filled me with purpose in equal measure. Each one reminded me that my story wasn't unique, but my platform was. I called the number. "This is Amara," I said. "Tell me what's happening." For the next hour, I listened to a woman named Jessica describe a marriage that sounded hauntingly familiar. The financial control disguised as partnership, the subtle undermining of her confidence and independence, the gradual isolation from friends and family who asked too many questions. By the end of the call, Jessica had the phone number for a lawyer who specialized in financial abuse cases, the contact information for a domestic violence counselor, and a plan for protecting her assets while she figured out her next steps. She also had something she hadn't had when she called: hope. "Thank you," she said before hanging up. "I've been feeling crazy for months, like maybe I was imagining things, or being too sensitive, but hearing you say it's not normal, that I deserve better, thank you." After the call ended, I sat in my kitchen and thought about the gun Marcus had left on this counter almost a year ago. At the time, it had felt like the end of everything: my marriage, my safety, my carefully constructed life. Now I understood it had actually been the beginning of learning that I was worth protecting, the beginning of understanding that accommodation and love aren't the same thing, the beginning of using my voice, my resources, and my experience to help other women recognize their own worth. The gun had been meant to silence me, to make me smaller, to force me back into compliance. Instead, it had set me free. 6 months later, Marcus was released from prison. I learned about it not from any official notification, but from a friend who saw him at a grocery store across town. "He looked different," she said. "Older, defeated, unsure of himself." I felt a moment of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. Whatever Marcus was dealing with now was a consequence of his own choices, not my responsibility.
I was busy with my own life, my own choices, my own future. The book had become a bestseller, spending 8 weeks on the New York Times list and generating speaking opportunities across the country. I'd started a nonprofit organization focused on financial literacy and abuse prevention. I'd begun dating someone, a kind, funny man who celebrated my success instead of feeling threatened by it. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own judgment about what I deserved and what I was willing to accept. On the anniversary of the day I'd found the gun, I hosted a dinner party in my home. Not the kind of carefully orchestrated event I used to plan to impress Marcus's colleagues, but a relaxed gathering of people I genuinely enjoyed. Kendra and her family, Sarah Chen and her partner, Uncle Jerome, a few of my speaking colleagues who'd become real friends. As we sat around my dining room table, the same table where I'd once tried to convince myself that Marcus's criticism was constructive feedback, I looked at the faces of people who knew my story and celebrated my strength instead of questioning my choices. "I want to make a toast," I said, raising my glass of wine, not expensive wine chosen to impress anyone, but wine I actually liked. "To second chances," I said. "To learning that it's never too late to choose yourself, to discovering that the life you thought you wanted might not be as good as the life you're brave enough to build. To Arya," Kendra added, "for showing all of us what courage looks like." We clinked glasses and I felt something I hadn't experienced in 21 years, complete contentment with my own life. Not happiness dependent on someone else's approval or behavior, but deep satisfaction with the choices I'd made and the person I'd become. Later, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up the dishes in my peaceful kitchen, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the woman who'd read Marcus's text and felt like her world was ending. The woman who'd spent 2 decades trying to earn love by being perfect, by being accommodating, by being everything to everyone, except herself. That woman had been afraid of being alone, afraid of being judged, afraid of being too much or not enough. This woman, the woman I'd become, wasn't afraid of anything. I'd learned that being alone was different from being lonely. I'd learned that other people's judgments said more about them than about me. I'd learned that being too much for some people meant being exactly right for others. Most importantly, I'd learned that revenge wasn't about hurting the people who'd hurt me. Real revenge was building a life so good, so authentic, so completely mine, that their opinions became irrelevant. Marcus had texted me from Las Vegas to tell me I was a failure. He was wrong about that, like he'd been wrong about so many things. I wasn't a failure, I was free. And freedom, I'd discovered, was the sweetest revenge of all. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing the final edits for my second book. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer anyway. Amara? The voice was hesitant, younger than I'd expected. Yes, my name is Amanda. I used to be married to Marcus Hendricks. I set down my coffee and gave the conversation my full attention. How can I help you? I read your book, both of them, and I realized I was living the same story you wrote about. The financial control, the manipulation, the way he made me feel like I was crazy for questioning anything. I'd heard from dozens of women over the past 3 years, but something in Amanda's voice told me this was different. Are you safe now? I asked. I think so. I left him 6 months ago after he was arrested for stealing money from the company where we both worked. But Arya, there's something you need to know. She paused, and I could hear her taking a shaky breath. He's been doing this for years, maybe decades. I found records of at least 4 other women he was involved with while we were married, all of them successful, all of them financially stable. I think you were just the first one who fought back publicly. The revelation hit me like cold water. Marcus hadn't been a man who'd made mistakes in our marriage. He'd been a predator with a pattern, systematically targeting successful women and exploiting their resources. Amanda, have you been in touch with the other women? 2 of them. One is scared to come forward, but the other she wants to press charges for what he did to her financially, but she's afraid no one will believe. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, afraid to press criminal charges because I worried people would think I was being vindictive. I thought about all the women who'd contacted me since then, convinced they were the only ones experiencing financial abuse in their relationship. Would she be willing to talk to me? I asked. I think so. Her name is Carmen and she has documentation going back 7 years. That afternoon, I had a 3-way call with Amanda and Carmen, along with Sarah Chen participating as legal counsel. Carmen's story was devastating and familiar. A successful marketing executive who'd supported Marcus for 3 years, while he systematically drained her business accounts and destroyed her credit. By the end of the week, we'd connected with 2 more women. By the end of the month, we had enough evidence to file a civil suit for systematic fraud and abuse. Marcus had been released from prison 8 months earlier and was apparently attempting to restart his pattern with a new victim, a successful doctor who'd recently become engaged to him. The civil suit made national news. Not just because of the dollar amounts involved. Marcus had stolen or manipulated his way to nearly $400,000 over a decade, but because it highlighted something legal experts were calling a new category of intimate partner abuse. Financial predation, Sarah called it. Systematic targeting of financially successful women for the purpose of long-term economic exploitation. The case became a catalyst for legislative changes in 3 states, expanding the definition of domestic violence to include financial predation and increasing penalties for intimate partner fraud. But the real victory was watching 5 women reclaim their power collectively. Amanda started a support group for women recovering from financial abuse. Carmen became an advocate for stronger credit protection laws. The other two women used their experiences to help friends and colleagues recognize warning signs in their own relationship. As for me, I continued writing, speaking, and building the life I'd always wanted but never thought I deserved. On the day the civil judgment was finalized, $1.2 million in damages, though we all knew Marcus would never be able to pay, I stood in the courthouse parking lot with 4 women who'd found the courage to fight back together. You know what the best part is? Amanda. He thought he was so smart, bouncing from woman to woman, convinced none of us would ever figure it out. But we did, Carmen added, because one of us was brave enough to tell her story publicly. They were looking at me when she said it, but I shook my head. We were all brave, I said. I just went first. As I drove home that afternoon, I thought about the text message that had started this journey. Married my assistant. You're a failure. Marcus had been wrong about the failure part, obviously, but he'd also been wrong about something else. He thought that text was the end of our story. Instead, it had been the prologue to something much bigger, a movement of women refusing to accept unacceptable behavior, supporting each other through the process of reclaiming their lives, and creating a world where financial abuse was recognized and prosecuted as the serious crime it was. My phone buzzed as I pulled into my driveway, a text from a number I didn't recognize. Miss Thompson, I think I need help. Can we talk? I smiled and typed back, of course, when works for you. The work continued. The healing continued. The courage continued to spread from one woman to another, creating ripples that reached farther than any of us could have imagined. And somewhere in all of that, Marcus Hendricks became what he'd always been, irrelevant. The real story had never been about him anyway. It had been about us, about women finding our voices, claiming our power, and discovering that we were worth so much more than we'd ever been taught to believe. That was a story worth telling. That was a story worth living. That was revenge at its finest, not destruction, but creation, not diminishing someone else, but elevating ourselves and everyone who came after us. I walked into my house, my beautiful, peaceful, completely mine house, and got back to work. There were more stories to write, more women to help, more systems to change. And for the first time in my life, I had all the time, resources, and freedom I needed to do it.